moving forward, and this is probably the best arc that's come out of this test match, because Nathan Lyon now has 500 test match wickets. Curator at the Adelaide Oval all of those years ago was never supposed to be this good. And according to Gideon Haigh, his skill is cricket's most rubbish skill, right? Right arm off spin. And now he is part of an elite list of bowlers in test match cricket, and only the third Australian alongside Shane Warne, who has 708 wickets, and Glenn McGrath, who I think is 565. Now he's joined them. And that's amazing. Like, he should be nowhere near those names, but he is. And that's his legend, isn't it? Gary.
I mean, there's 8 guys, isn't there? And so if you go through them, he's by far the most unlikely of that list. They all had to overcome some various things. You know, Warne obviously had, you know, the physical issues that he had. McGrath probably had the fact that Warne was at the other end and was taking a big chunk of it. You know, McGrath had to do it in a bowling attack where everyone was taking wickets. Broad had to learn the game when he came in. You know, Nepo baby, you know, jokes aside, like, he wasn't a fully developed player when he first came in. Again, Anderson had another major bowler at the other end. Courtney Walsh doing it for the West Indies over that long period when it was hard enough to break into the bowling attack when he came in. You know, Murali is a one-man attack. Ashwin not playing away from home. Anil Kumble having to do it on flat tracks. I think I've named everyone on that list that wasn't Nathan Lyon. But at the age of 18, every single one of those players was thought to be an international quality player, right? Like, and a potential star. There's a big difference between potential star and becoming a star. And you have to give them all credit for, you know, what they did and how they developed. But even Jimmy Anderson, who at the age of 17, no one knew who he was. By 18, he was rushed into Lancashire's side, right? Lyon's the one that doesn't fit that template, right? Lyon is the one that you kind of, even when he was picked, it felt like he was another one of the, Australia's just picking another wacky spinner again. And, you know, we're going to have to remember his name along with Jason Frazier, right? Like, it never made sense. And then you get 2 years into his career and he gets dropped twice in the 1 year, right? And I don't think with those, from that point forward, it's just astonishing how consistent he is and everything else. But he's such an odd cricketer. We've got, as you know, got a feature that I haven't quite finished. If everyone in my house could stop vomiting, I might have a chance of finishing at one stage. But, you know, we've been working on this other feature about Nathan Lyon. I think he really is such an outlier in so many different ways. I'll tell you one stat that I've got from the other piece, which I think I was just looking at here. So while he is, while he plays in Australia, while he plays in India, I'll start that again. Sorry, I'm going to get this right eventually. While he's in Asia, I can't even find the stat either. While he's in Asia, I think he averages something like 31.1. And the global average, the Asian average for all spinners at that time is about 30.8. So he's not getting the Asian boost that pretty much every other spinner does. And, you know, we know partly that's because of the top spin and everything else. But when he bowls in Australia, he has taken, I want to get these numbers roughly right, but I think there's 450 wickets that have been taken by spin during his career in Australia, of which he has taken 237 of, right?
Wow.
The other spinners average 62 and he averages 31. And that's not the normal pattern you see of guys, you know, even if you've got someone like Graham Swan, who's probably the best person to compare him to, although certainly not for longevity. But if you look at Swanee has a 3 or 4 run drop in Asia. Like, it helps his overall average to play in Asia, and he's a good bowler at home. Whereas other spinners occasionally take wickets in England and everything else. No one takes wickets with spin in Australia outside of like Nathan Lyon. And then he gets to Asia and he doesn't get a bump. It's he's just a remarkably weird cricketer from beginning to end. And you know, I don't know if you know about where he's from, but he's from a town that has, I don't know, let's say 7,000 or 8,000 people in it. And even the fact that he's from New South Wales, and they've obviously produced some incredible players, you know, Bradman and Glenn McGrath, and, you know, he's not far from Wagga Wagga, which I think had Jeff Lawson, Michael Slater, and Mark Taylor, right? And yet Young doesn't have this lineage of great players. And instead of going to Sydney, he ends up in Canberra. So he goes from one outpost to another outpost. Like, it's remarkable that Nathan Lyon made it. And I'll tell you one last thing about him, which I've always found really interesting. There's an Australian spinner called Peter Sleep, who you might not have heard of.
I actually have. We did a whole thing on spinners in Australia, remember?
Australian
spinners. Of course, I know about Peter Sleep now.
So Peter Sleep was working with Cricket Australia for I want to say mid 2000s, and he stopped working with them, and he was interviewed somewhere. And I tried to get him to chat to me about this, but he never wanted to. But he basically said there was no way Australia could have a spinner that came from inside the system. It would have to be someone who came from outside the system. And his thought was that they weren't training spinners correctly, and that the next great spinner would come from outside. Now, Nathan Lyon's kind of in and outside the system. He's not from one of the major cities, and Canberra is certainly not within the system when you think about it. You know, it's basically Nathan Lyon and Brad Haddin are the two cricketers from Canberra who have come through that area, even if Lyon's not from Canberra, but went through Canberra. Michael Bevan was born in Canberra, but, you know, he was so good, he was in Sydney really, really early on. But then you've got the fact he goes to South Australia and can't even get onto, you know, into the squad, and ends up as the grounds as curator, as you said before. It's interesting that Peter Sleep was kind of right, that it had to be this guy that came so far out of the system. And even Todd Murphy, the next spinner, who might be, you know, Lyon's replacement, is another country spinner who was kind of picked from nowhere by you know, again. So there's something to be said for the fact that, you know, these guys coming from outside the system are slightly better than inside the system. But it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting point. Australian spinners, diamonds in the rough, right?